Queen Victoria, the famous monarch who helped to modernize Britain over her 63-year reign, had 42 grandchildren. Among them were the daughters of Princess Alice of the United Kingdom. One married her aunt's suitor, two married Russian Grand Dukes and were killed in the Revolution, one got shot, and the last died tragically young. Here are their stories. Princess Irene of Hesse and by Rhine was born on July 11, 1866. She was the third daughter of Louis, Grand Duke of Hesse and by Rhine, and Alice of the United Kingdom. Irene's name was derived from the Greek word for peace, since she was born at the end of the Austro-Prussian War. Irene's mother didn't find her to be as beautiful as her younger sister, Alix, and her older sister, Ella. The family lived a simple life despite being royalty. They cooked their own food, made their own beds, and dressed in less than extravagant clothes. Alice would often take her children to hospitals with her to show them what life was like for non-royals. The family's life was very happy for Irene's first few years until her youngest brother, Freddie, died from a fall from a window, which he could have survived had he not had hemophilia. A few years later, Irene's oldest sister, Victoria, fell ill with diphtheria, which the rest of the family except her sister Ella caught. Their mother was the only one who didn't show symptoms, so she nursed them back to health. The youngest, Marie, died of the disease. When they seemed to be recovering, Alice caught the disease and died of it soon after. Queen Victoria wanted her grandchildren to recover from their loss, so she invited them to Osborne for a while. They continued to visit England, where Irene met her maternal first cousin, the son of the Crown Prince and Princess of Germany, Henry of Prussia. They met again when Irene and her sister Alix were bridesmaids for her Aunt Beatrice's wedding. The Queen was pleased and encouraged the match. Henry and Irene were wed on May 24th, 1888. Irene wore a low-neck dress, trimmed with large diamonds and a large necklace, set with diamonds. Her breast ornaments, which were diamonds, and her bracelets were all ancient royal jewels. Henry's father had recently become Kaiser of Germany, but was quite ill and dying. He plastered on a smile and made himself get through the ceremony, then congratulated the couple at the end. He died a month later. Irene gave birth to her first son, Waldemar, not long after, who was followed by Sigismund and Heinrich. Waldemar and Heinrich both had hemophilia, the disease that prevents blood from clotting, which Irene's brother, Freddie, had died from so long ago. Waldemar lived fairly long, until 56, but Heinrich died at the age of 4 after a fall similar to Freddie's. A few months after her son's death, Irene's sister had her only son, Alexei, also a hemophiliac. Irene had wanted a daughter badly, but never had one. Irene and her mother-in-law, also her aunt, and she was called to the Empress's side when she was on her deathbed. A decade or so later, World War I broke out. Irene and her sisters were all on opposite sides of the war, and all would suffer because of it. Victoria returned to England as quickly as she could, but her husband had to leave the Navy because of his German heritage. Alix and Ella were murdered in the Russian Revolution. Irene, too, would have to flee a revolution. When the revolutionaries arrived in the city where they lived, they decided to flee, but Irene was shot in the arm as they sped out to safety. Irene met with Anna Anderson, who claimed to be Irene's niece, Grand Duchess Anastasia. She didn't believe Anna. In her old age, Irene followed in her mother's footsteps and did lots of charity work, founding a children's hospital named for her son, Heinrich, who had died when he was just a child. Irene herself died on December 11, 1953, aged 87. Alix of Hesse and by Rhine was born on June 6, 1872 in Darmstadt, as the fourth daughter of her parents. Before her, they had Ernst Louis and Friedrich, named Freddie. Alix was very young when Freddie died, and still quite young when the family fell ill with diphtheria. Before the tragedy of her mother and youngest sister's death, Alix was a very lively child, but after the losses, she grew into a very serious young woman. She was Queen Victoria's favorite granddaughter and was exactly the Queen's ideal of a prim and proper woman. Alix spent a great amount of her early life in England with her grandmother. She became a beautiful woman with reddish-brown hair, high cheekbones, pale skin, dark blue eyes, and long eyelashes. Her grandmother wanted to marry her to her first cousin, Albert Victor, Duke of Clarence, and become Queen of England one day, but she declined. She had her heart set on a different cousin. While attending Ella's wedding, Alix had fallen in love with the son of Tsar Alexander III of Russia, Tsarevich Nicholas. Nicholas's family didn't approve, but as the Tsar's health declined, he began to change his mind, and gave the couple his blessing on his deathbed. They were married immediately after the Tsar's death. To learn more about their wedding, watch my video about it. At first, Alix did not want to convert to Russian Orthodoxy to marry Nicholas, but Ella convinced her and she converted, taking the name Alexandra Fyodorovna. Tsarina Alexandra was under a lot of pressure from the people and from relatives to give birth to an heir to the throne. She had so far had 4 daughters, Olga, Tatiana, Maria, and Anastasia. But Tsar Paul I had despised his mother, Catherine the Great, so much that he had barred women from the succession. After 10 years of praying for a son, Alix finally got one and she named him Alexei. Olga, the oldest child, was able to attend his baptism, and she was quite excited about being able to attend such a grand event, as she had not been allowed to attend any of her sister's baptisms. Soon it became clear that Tsarevich Alexei, the boy who was to become the future Tsar and the only son of Tsar Nicholas and Tsarina Alix, had hemophilia, the blood disorder that prevents blood from clotting. Things that seem extremely mundane, such as a cut, would be serious wounds to Alexei. Many relatives had died of the disease. Queen Victoria had passed the gene on to her second daughter, Alice, who had passed it on to Alix and Irene. Women carried the disease but never showed symptoms. Therefore, any of Alix's daughters could have been carriers of the disease, though they did not live to find out if they were. The family grew even closer to protect the fragile Alexei. Her only son's hemophilia was the beginning of the end for Nicholas and Alix. Shortly after, Russia went to war with Japan. It was supposed to be an easy victory for Russia, who thought that they had a superior navy. Instead, it was the first time that a large Western nation such as Russia suffered a defeat at the hands of a small Asian nation such as Japan. And in the chaos, a holy monk named Rasputin showed up. Rasputin was known for his healing powers. He healed people using questionable methods and even healed people over telegram. He seemed to be easing Alexei's pain, though he probably just took Alexei off the medication his doctors were giving him, aspirin, which was known to make hemophilia worse. But Rasputin was making the boy feel better, so Nicholas and Alix decided to keep him around. Rasputin barely ever bathed and slept with quite a few women. His wife just acted like a disappointed mother and didn't even try to stop him. Once, a nurse accused Rasputin of raping her, but Alix didn't believe her and fired her instead. The family couldn't afford to lose Rasputin and their son. In 1914, there was yet another disaster for the family, the outbreak of World War I. Alix worked as a nurse with her 2 eldest daughters, Olga and Tatiana, while Nicholas went off to serve as a commander-in-chief of the army. He wasn't a very good one. Since he was away, Alix was left in charge of the empire. Alix was German while Russia was fighting Germany, so this was a horrible choice. Alix had no idea how to rule and relied on Rasputin for advice. Naturally, the Russian people were enraged that a German and a smelly monk were ruling their country. Family members continued trying to warn her away from Rasputin, but she never listened. In 1916, Rasputin was brutally murdered by the Grand Duke Dmitry Pavlovich and Felix Yusupov, who was married to the Tsar's only niece. The entire family was devastated, except of course those who had killed him. Not long after the mystic's death, the Tsar was forced to abdicate and the family was held under house arrest at Ipatiev House. The family tried to make the best of their captivity and the daughters learned how to make bread. Alix and Nicholas's health worsened and so did Olga's. She reportedly lost weight and became very depressed while staying at Ipatiev House. They were later moved to Siberia. Meanwhile, the Bolsheviks had overthrown the provisional government and Vladimir Lenin was now ruling Russia, which, by the way, was in the middle of a civil war. The rebel White Army was approaching and Lenin worried that they would free the captive royals, so he had them moved to the House of Special Purpose. But moving them wouldn't be enough to keep them out of his way. In the early hours of July 17, 1918, the family was told to dress and come downstairs quickly. They were taken to the basement, where the guards lined them up and shot the family and some of their servants. The initial rounds of gunfire did not kill any of Nicholas and Alix's daughters, but it killed them. Tsarina Alexandra was only 46 years old. Following their execution, their bodies were damaged beyond recognition by the Bolsheviks. The bodies of the imperial family were not found and identified until many decades later, and since the execution had been carried out so secretly, how could anyone be sure if it even happened? There were many women who pretended to be the Grand Duchess or Alexei, and even people who claimed they were descended from them, but the bodies were found many decades later. The family was interred in the St. Peter and Paul Cathedral, and all were canonized as saints in the Russian Orthodox Church. Princess Marie of Hesse and by Rhine, the last child of her parents, was born on May 24, 1874 in Darmstadt. She was known by the family as May and resembled her dead older brother, Fridtjof, as a toddler, but grew to look like her eldest sister Victoria. May and Alix were inseparable and often dressed alike. May charmed her parents, siblings, and grandparents with her smile, which never left her face. In 1878, May was just 4 years old when her eldest sister came down with diphtheria. She died due to the disease on November 16th, and her mother was devastated. Alice sat next to her dead daughter, kissing her face. She kept the death from her sick children so that they wouldn't suffer more of the shock. May was just 4 years old. Her siblings refused to believe the news when they heard. Alice muttered May's name with her final breaths as she died of the disease that her youngest daughter had died from not so long before.